when a young Mennonite woman was found dead in Arizona.
He has a gun.
He has it?
He has it. Let's go.
The police were desperate to discover why someone would take her several hours away from her home in New Mexico, only to shoot her dead and dump her body.
Go, go, go.
Sheriff's office, get out of the car!
Get on the car.
Get off the car! Step out now!
Little did they know that as they worked with the Mennonite community to solve this terrible crime, authorities would end up discovering a decade's worth of unsolved crimes, all leading back to one depraved man.
Get your hands up! Step away from the car!
On February 22, 2020, Cynthia Schultz was pleasantly spending her morning collecting firewood for her camp at the Sunset Crater National Park, around 20 miles from Flagstaff, Arizona. While out, Cynthia spotted a woman lying face down in the dirt. Thinking something might be wrong, she called out to the woman. However, when she didn't respond, Cynthia had a horrifying revelation. The woman was dead. Cynthia alerted the authorities, and soon the area was swarmed with police, trying to get to the bottom of this tragedy.
He didn't move or nothing. He just went and looked, checked her, and okay. Rigid as a rigor mortis. She was real stiff, cold.
It was immediately clear to the detectives that this case was a homicide, as the victim had a gunshot wound to the head and her hands were bound together with duct tape. As they inspected the body closer, they noticed that the victim was wearing very modest and traditional clothes, which made them suspect she might be a Mennonite. Mennonites are a Christian denomination that practice a conservative lifestyle, dedicating themselves to their religion and only using technology that's strictly necessary, such as basic phones. Through forensic comparisons, the police were able to identify the mysterious victim as 27-year-old Sasha Kraus, a Mennonite woman who had gone missing from New Mexico on January 18th, over a month before she was discovered. While police may have finally been able to give their victim a name, it was now time to uncover her horrific story and find out the truth about how she ended up murdered in a national park nearly 300 miles from her home. Through interviews and investigation, the police were able to determine that Sasha was a Sunday school teacher who had worked and lived on the Lamp and Light compound, a Mennonite community in Farmington, New Mexico. On the night of her disappearance, Sasha was making a quick late-night stop by the Sunday school to finish an errand. When she failed to come home that night, Sasha's roommates alerted the community and the police were soon involved. Unfortunately, the case had hit a dead end fairly soon after beginning, and it seemed like Sasha had simply vanished into thin air. However, not only did authorities now have Sasha's body, they were also able to recover her phone, a key piece of evidence that could likely point them in the direction of their killer. Through phone records, the police were able to deduce that Sasha hadn't just vanished. She'd been kidnapped. As her kidnapper drove her to Arizona, Sasha's phone could be seen pinging off of select phone towers before it died. Throughout her entire trip to Arizona, there was only one other device pinging off of those same towers, and it belonged to a man named Mark Gooch. Mark Gooch was an airman working at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, and at first glance it appeared he had nothing in common with Sasha outside of his cell phone records. Nevertheless, Lauren Nagel, the lead detective on the case, traveled to Luke Air Force Base and sat down with Mark for questioning. Detective Nagel introduces herself as Detective Jones, as she got married at some point between this interview and her appearance in court.
Hi, thank you for your patience. That would work out that way. I asked you to come talk with me, and then, obviously, I did a phone call, right? All right, so I'm Detective Jones. I'm with the Sheriff's Office. I'm sure you're wondering what I want to chat with you about. Of course, I'm about to fill you in. We just got to go through some procedural stuff first.
The interview takes place in an interrogation room on Luke Air Force Base and is an ideal setup according to the Reed technique, a popular method of interrogation. There's no barrier between Detective Nagel and Mark, allowing her to observe all of his movements and nonverbal communication. The walls appear to be bare, which is intentional to minimize distractions. It's also helpful that there's only one detective present, which can make the interview feel less threatening. Additionally, Mark is seated near the door, which helps send the message that he's able to leave at any time. This may make him less defensive and more likely to talk. It can also help prevent any false imprisonment claims later. Detective Nagel and Mark speak briefly about his responsibilities as a mechanic in the Air Force before the detective asks about Mark's life back home.
So what'd you do before Air Force then?
I worked in the diesel mechanic shop for about a year and did construction as well and grew up on a dairy farm. So.
Oh yeah? That's pretty cool. Do you have siblings?
Yes, ma'am. 6.
Oh wow, really?
Yep.
Okay, big family. Yeah. Tell me about them, like how many brothers, sisters?
3 brothers and 3 sisters.
Okay, got it. And where are they at now?
All over the country.
All over?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you the youngest?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Who would you say you're closest with?
I don't know, we kind of got separated pretty good after everybody started moving out.
So you're not close with any of them, though?
I talk with them on the phone here and there, but I'm probably closest, maybe my brother back in Wisconsin.
Oh, gotcha. Which brother's that?
It's Sam.
Sam. Okay.
Mark comes across as a polite, well-mannered airman, but as we'll see over the course of the interview, this is just a facade.
So what do you do on your time off?
Play on my computer sometimes, play some games, go hiking as much as possible, but work on my car and bike a lot too. Try to stay active.
Cool. Do you like go to church or anything like that?
No, man, the church closed down.
Oh, that's closed too?
Coronavirus.
Got you. Is that something that you did before it closed?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay.
Yes, ma'am. I would attend church quite a bit.
Okay. If you don't mind me asking about that, what kind of religion did you grow up in?
We grew up in a Christian, I guess the religion, I guess is how you call it, but Christianity is how I was raised.
Oh, okay. Any like specific denomination of Christianity?
Mainly they were called Mennonites, or Amish. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that.
Not really. Tell me about that.
But basically drive darker colored vehicles. We use flip phones when you have internet, stuff like that. So it was pretty sheltered, you could say.
Pretty sheltered.
Difficult.
I got it.
With this admission, the police now have another unexpected link between Mark and Sasha. They're both Mennonites. When the detective brings up the topic of religion, Mark starts to fumble with his words, indicating that the topic of religion may be something Mark doesn't want to talk about.
In that last 6 months, have you traveled out of state anywhere?
Yes, ma'am. When I came down here, I drove my car from Wisconsin down here.
Oh, okay. So you drove from Wisconsin to Phoenix?
Correct.
Anywhere else?
Pretty much state of Arizona. I try to do as much hiking as possible.
Mark doesn't know it yet, but he's just been caught in his first lie, the first of many. Using words like pretty much, mostly, and similar sentiments are qualifiers and often throw up a red flag to detectives. These words usually indicate half-truths or that there's something the individual may not wish to disclose. In this case, Mark saying that he pretty much stays in Arizona isn't true at all, and he's hiding something very big. He also uses filler sounds such as to delay answering so he has time to think about his response.
You're probably wondering, why I'm here. So I'm a detective. I'm with Coconino County Sheriff's Office.
Okay.
And I am working a homicide investigation.
Okay.
There was a girl named Sasha Krause that was killed. Did you hear about that case?
I've seen it in the news. Yes, ma'am.
Tell me what you know about the case.
It's basically the news report. She was from New Mexico, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she left home one evening, and they found her in northern Arizona, like Flagstaff area, correct?
Right. So that's the case that I'm working. Any idea now why I'd want to talk to you at all?
Probably because I was traveling up in New Mexico area, probably.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
As the detective reveals why she's here interviewing him, Mark begins to show more and more signs that he may be hiding something. When asked what he knows about Sasha Krause's murder, Mark vaguely says that they found her. This is a soft way to describe something as violent as a homicide.
And they found her in northern Arizona.
When suspects shy away from using realistic words such as murdered or killed, this can be a red flag for possible deception as they're minimizing the crime. Additionally, Mark uses the qualifier probably 3 times in 8 seconds.
Probably because I was probably traveling up in New Mexico area, probably.
So we've got these things called license plate readers.
Okay.
And your vehicle hit a license plate reader in that area. So tell me about that. You were traveling then. I'm a little confused because at first you said you hadn't traveled, but now did you go to New Mexico?
Yes, ma'am.
Your vehicle was picked up on that license plate reader in the general area on the same day actually that she went missing. And so what I'm doing at this point is I got to talk to everybody, as you can imagine. That's my job. Anybody who's in the area, anybody who could have seen something.
Despite the fact that Mark appears to be intentionally lying, Detective Nagel does a great job of calling him out for it while also remaining non-judgmental. She does this in order to keep Mark from feeling threatened and ending the interview, while also not letting him get comfortable in any of the lies he tells. The more someone repeats a lie, the more confident they will become. She also keeps him calm by not telling him the whole truth about why she's there. Although she's telling Mark that she's just interviewing everyone who got picked up on a certain license plate reader, we know that Mark is actually her number 1 suspect, and that he was found through phone records. This is just one example of the ways detectives can lie during interviews in order to get a suspect to tell them the truth.
So why were you in New Mexico that day?
I was planning on going, so I was checking out Mennonite churches. I had traveled up to Flagstaff.
Mark takes a big pause after he says he traveled, followed by his foot twitching, and then he says to Flagstaff.
I had traveled up to Flagstaff.
This is something called a cadence switch, which is essentially a disruption in the flow and inflection of speech. In an interrogation, this can be seen as an indication of something being left out of a story, as the speaker paused and changed their speech pattern.
I was hoping that ski resort was still open, but
Yeah.
they were closed due to coronavirus starting up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I figured I'd go check out a Mennonite church up in that area. So I knew some people from Wisconsin that used to live there.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to go just attend because I've really been missing that social life.
Yeah.
I used to have at Mennonite churches.
Is there any reason why you didn't tell me when I asked you if you've traveled? You didn't mention that to me. Is there a reason that you didn't?
No, man, I'm sorry. My memory just, I don't know, it's not what it used to be. I'm tired today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry if I failed to mention that, but
Okay.
I was not trying to hide or withhold information.
Okay, thanks.
Once again, Mark is caught in a lie. While explaining why he was in New Mexico, he mentions that he was wanting to go skiing. However, the ski resort he drove to, the Arizona Snow Bowl Ski Resort in Flagstaff, was closed due to COVID-19 restrictions. In actuality, the Snow Bowl didn't close for COVID until March, well after Mark would have been there on January 18th. As he says this, he half shrugs with his right shoulder. It's barely perceptible, but lines up when he says, "I don't know." Internally, he does know, and is just making excuses, but he's not confident in his memory excuse. Mark is also sitting with his leg crossed in a way that creates a barrier between himself and the detective. He switched to this guarded position after he was asked about traveling. When questioned about why he didn't mention this trip earlier, Mark's military formality helps him appear more truthful than he's actually being. He refers to Detective Nagel as ma'am and immediately apologizes for not mentioning the trip because he was tired. Unfortunately for Mark, no matter how polite he is, this omission is definitely a sign that he has a reason to keep this trip a secret, and the detective has certainly picked up on that.
Do you remember that day then when you went to New Mexico?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I remember some of it.
So what time about did you leave here, Luke Air Force Base?
Probably left fairly early in the morning.
Okay.
And then what time did you say I was in the area?
I'd have to go grab I've got like the charts, the paper.
Okay.
What time? Well, let's go through the day. So when you say fairly early, what does that mean to you?
Probably about 7.
Okay.
7 is when I left to head up there.
Mm-hmm.
Stopped in Flagstaff for a while. Just got some, got some fuel, I believe.
This is one of the last fully truthful statements Mark says while recounting his trip to New Mexico. While he may think he's being sneaky with his lies, Detective Nagel knows a lot more than she's letting on, and is ready to catch every lie Mark throws her way.
Did you go anywhere else while you were in Flagstaff?
Nope, no, not on the way up. Pretty much straight driving. Had a really pretty snow-capped mountain up there.
Yeah.
At that time.
So you stopped in Flagstaff, you got gas, and then you think that you drove directly to the church in Farmington?
I stopped in Farmington to get some fuel.
Watch how the detective suddenly starts kicking her foot. Since this discussion is about the scene of the crime, she likely feels a lot of pressure with these questions, trying to make sure she gets his story, and also has what she needs to confront him later. With all of his deceptive behavior already, she's likely fairly certain that he is the person she's looking for, and these are really the high-stakes questions.
About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I had swung by the church to check their sign and see what time their services was, and they were, let me think, I think it was just Sunday evening.
At this point in the investigation, Detective Nagel has spent a lot of time at Sasha's church, looking for any sign of what happened to her on January 18th. In her entire time there, the detective has never seen any sign even somewhat similar to the one Mark is claiming to have checked.
Did you, talk to anybody while you were there?
No, there was no one at the church, and I didn't want to bother anybody, so.
Did you like it? I don't know. What is it a church that, like what you grew up in, or different?
It looked fairly similar, but it's not really the same, so I'm a little disappointed with the whole long drive and everything. I didn't really see it as working out long term to make it there.
Yeah, that is a long drive.
It'd be way too far to drive every weekend, so I talked to my friend. He wanted to go hiking on Sunday, and I really wanted to make it for that. I work with him in the shop. And
who's that friend?
His name's Kefley.
Mark claims that he made plans with Kefley to go hiking the following day. However, according to Kefley himself, the two actually went to a swap meet, also known as a flea market.
From what I'm understanding, it doesn't sound like you were there for very long.
No, man.
And then where did you go after that?
I'm trying to remember if I was going to go look for a hike, or did I head straight back? I think I started, once he called me about the hike on Sunday, I think I started heading back.
He called you?
Correct.
While you were over there?
Correct.
Okay.
According to Mark, Kefley called him to discuss plans. However, the phone records disagree with Mark. Mark and Kefley only texted that day, and in fact, the only person that Mark spoke to on the phone was his brother Sam. Not only did Mark and Sam call, but they actually called each other 6 times, for a total of nearly 2.5 hours, which is longer than the two had talked on the phone for the last 6 months combined.
On the way back home, did you stop anywhere?
I don't know, I might have made it to Phoenix on a full tank, I don't know. I'd have to check.
Okay. So am I understanding correctly, you don't remember stopping anywhere?
No, ma'am.
Is that fair to say?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you remember what time you got back here to home?
It was fairly late. It was probably 8 or 9 o'clock. That's when I got back.
Long day, man.
Yep.
Mark makes a lot of lip and mouth movements here, known as micro-expressions. One of the biggest indicators of deception and hiding something is a movement called disappearing lips, which Mark demonstrates. Once again, Mark's account of the trip contradicts his phone records. While he might say that he went straight home from New Mexico, the records actually show him stopping in Sunset Crater National Park for several hours. With Mark having officially told his story about where he was on the day of Sasha's murder, Detective Nagel is noticing more and more red flags. Mark consistently lies, hesitates, and supposedly struggles to recall information when he is asked about stops he made, times, and what he was doing at specific points throughout his trip. When a suspect has a memory of extremes, meaning their memory is either too good or too bad, this is seen as a red flag to detectives. Just over 2 months have passed since January 18th, so it doesn't make sense that Mark is struggling so much to recall basic information about his trip. Given that this trip was pretty out of the ordinary for him, the trip should actually stick out in his mind even more.
What do you think should happen to the person that did that to Sasha?
As far as Like, what are you getting at there?
But if we caught the person who killed her, what should happen to them?
Well, you should probably let the law deal with it. Or maybe the Mennonite community has a way of doing things differently.
In the Reed technique, this line of questioning is known as the punishment question, and it can be a good indicator of deception. Individuals who give vague answers are more likely to be deceptive than those who answer with strong, definitive punishments. Mark pauses for an incredibly long time after being asked what he thinks should happen to Sasha's killer, and he eventually settles on, "I don't know." This is the exact type of vague answer that sets off alarm bells for detectives when it comes to the punishment question. After a few more questions, Detective Nagel tells Mark that she's going to step out for just a few minutes to review her notes. After letting Mark stew for 10 minutes, Detective Nagel comes back in and gets ready to really take Mark's story apart and figure out what exactly it is that he's lying about.
On the way back, what time did you come back through the gate?
It was dark, possibly 8 or 9. Probably later than that, I'm not sure.
So what's like a reasonable time frame? So like you're saying around 8 or 9, like what's the latest you think you possibly came through that gate?
Probably could have been 1 or 2. 8 or 9 to 1 or 2 is probably the most time frame that I can think of.
Okay.
It was dark when I came through.
It's kind of a big time frame there though.
I understand.
8 p.m. to 2 a.m. is pretty different.
I understand.
Okay. So you want to stick with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Now that Detective Nagel has informed Mark his story doesn't add up, it's likely that he's going to respond with even less specifics than he was before, hence his 6-hour time span. If Mark is adamant that he got home at 8 p.m., but then video footage shows otherwise, it will reflect badly on his credibility. On the other hand, if he admits that it was 2 a.m. when he got home, then there's a large chunk of time that's completely unaccounted for between Mark leaving the church and arriving home. While Mark might be trying to avoid getting caught in a lie by avoiding specifics, in actuality, this just makes him even more suspicious.
So what if I told you that the time that you came in the gate that morning was 6:53 in the morning?
Would not guess it was that late.
That's a long time.
Yes, ma'am.
So how do you explain that?
I stopped and slept in the car. On the way back, I had trouble staying awake. Tried to stop and sleep multiple times, but that's... Couldn't really sleep. It was cold.
Okay.
Only driving back.
Okay.
Now, Mark has to scramble to fill in the gaps that Detective Nagel is pointing out. Mark claimed he left at 7 in the morning on January 18th, and according to the detective's records, he didn't get home until nearly that same time the following morning. Not only is this around 10 hours after the original time Mark gave for when he got home, but it's almost 5 hours after the revised time he gave. It's also highly suspicious that he has never mentioned this supposed nap he took in his car on the way home. And it definitely comes across that Mark is doing anything he can to try and cover up his lies.
Have you gone to Flagstaff any more than that one time?
No, ma'am. Except when I came down from Wisconsin to Luke. I don't remember which route I took coming in.
Okay. So after this New Mexico trip, you have not gone back up to Flagstaff again, is that right?
Not to my knowledge.
Mark saying not to my knowledge doesn't make sense here, because how could he travel somewhere without his knowledge? This is a selective memory statement, but in this situation, it also just doesn't even fit with the statement, and he would have been better off going with "I'm not sure," or "I don't think so," or some other selective memory statement. He must be starting to really feel some anxiety about this, because his thought processes are less logical and his word choices aren't great.
So I know that you went back up to Flagstaff a couple days later.
Okay.
And I've got a couple different ways to confirm that, like your gate checkouts and evidence that you were up in Flagstaff. So did you go back to Flagstaff for some reason a couple days later?
Possibly went for a drive. Went to go. I don't remember.
When asked about going to Flagstaff again, Mark hesitates for a long time before answering. Significant delays can be a red flag for deception. Some questions require thought, so it would make sense for someone to stop and think before answering. However, it doesn't take this much thought to remember if you recently went to a town 2 hours away from where you live, meaning that Mark's hesitation just comes off as suspicious. Clearly, Mark isn't going to be truthful about what he was really up to on January 18th. So Detective Nagel changes gears and starts asking Mark more about his Mennonite connection to Sasha.
Earlier when we were talking, you mentioned how when you're not born into the Mennonite church, we use that word outsider. Like you're kind of an outsider compared to like people who are born in. Sasha was like that too. Did you know that?
No.
Her family was not born into Mennonite church. So I'm wondering if you're willing to kind of tell me. I noticed I just saw a little bit of an emotion in you when we talked about that. Is there something that happened to you in the Mennonite church that upsets you?
Not really, it's just a way of life, and I didn't really like it, and I was happy to be out of it. My parents left the church.
By stating not really, he's denying anything happened to him, but not strongly. By using a qualifying statement instead of just saying no, it suggests that there is something, but he doesn't want to talk about it.
Okay. So Mark, what I do for a living is talk to people.
Understood.
And I just feel like I can read people a little. I know I don't know you. I'm not going to even pretend I do. But there's something there. And is it just something you don't want to talk about? Something that happened that made you leave the church?
No, ma'am, I pretty much left the church when my parents decided to leave.
Okay.
Mark uses another qualifier, but what is more interesting are his lip movements. It seems like his lip movements are his fidgeting behaviors, but he's probably had some training about not showing anxiety both in the home he grew up in, as well as in the military, so he doesn't have a lot of the bigger nonverbal cues that we look for. Yet these lip movements, which continue to return to the disappearing lips, make it clear that he's withholding information. It's almost like he's trying to hold in whatever it is he really wants to say. While Mark may be playing it cool, the detective knows he's hiding something. Before this interview even began, Detective Nagel was able to go through Mark's text messages and saw some concerning things regarding his views on Mennonites. In a text conversation, Mark and Sam are told by their brother Jacob, a Virginia state trooper, that he had just given 2 Mennonites a speeding ticket. Mark and Sam are both overjoyed to hear this, and Mark even says that he hopes that Jacob treated the Mennonites like shit. Sam makes a point of calling the Mennonites cultists, giving some insight into how he and his brothers feel about the religion. In another conversation between just Mark and Sam, Mark tells Sam that his surveillance on the Arizona Mennonites that morning was boring. The use of the word surveillance was incredibly alarming to authorities, and clued them into the fact that he may have been planning some kind of attack on the community for quite a while.
We have a detective talking to Sam right now.
Okay.
In Wisconsin. Okay? And so I want you to know that for this main reason. Sam's telling us some stuff, and you're talking to me, and I want to just make sure, what both of you guys are telling us lines up. And
Sure.
what I know a little bit about from what Sam said sounds like something's going on here as far as like maybe you have hard feelings against the Mennonite church, or maybe like a grudge or something like that.
So let me get this straight. You're talking to Sam right now, huh?
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like I need to get a lawyer because you're trying to pin something on me.
Well, I read you your rights at the beginning of this.
Yes, ma'am. And I'd like to see a lawyer now.
You would like to speak with the lawyer?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I'm not going to ask you any more questions then. I am going to have you sit here for a few minutes.
Understood.
And then I'm going to kind of explain to you what else is going on today, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You go with that water?
Correct.
All right.
Detective Nagel is using a bit of the prisoner's dilemma technique, pinning one suspect against the other. We see him do a big anchor point movement immediately after, and his illustrators don't line up with his words. As soon as the detective leaves the room, Mark unbarriers his legs. Detective Nagel's comments clearly struck a nerve with Mark, and for the first time, we see him change his reaction and become stern. He clearly doesn't like that his brother is also being interviewed. Perhaps Mark has good reason to fear that Sam will say too much to the cops, as while Sam refused to answer the majority of questions during his brief interview, he did say one thing that caught detectives' attention. Not only did Sam claim that Mark had a grudge against Mennonites, but when asked if he knew why the cops were questioning him, Sam ominously replied no, but that he knew his brother and how he is, giving police even more reason to be suspicious of Mark. With his interview concluded, Mark was served several search warrants for his phone, apartment, and car, all of which proved to be very enlightening to the authorities. The first thing investigators noticed when looking at Mark's car was how spotless it was. Upon further inspection, they were able to recover a receipt that showed Mark had gotten his car heavily detailed on February 23rd, the day after it was announced to the public that Sasha's body had been found. Additionally, the police also discovered some black nitrile gloves in the car, alongside some suspicious stains. Now that detectives are finally able to scour Mark's phone, more inconsistencies begin to pop up. According to his deletion records, Mark had deleted several files and documents from his Google account early in the morning of January 19th, after returning home from his New Mexico trip. He also deleted several texts with Sam where he discussed getting his car detailed, stating that he wanted the detailers to clean the interior really well. With several concerning, if somewhat circumstantial things found in Mark's phone and car, they had enough to detain him. However, police still didn't have enough evidence to actually connect Mark to Sasha's killing, never mind justify an arrest and guarantee a conviction. There was still the puzzling question of why, as there was no clear motive why Mark would have killed Sasha. Investigators soon began interviewing and interrogating the people closest to him in the hopes that they could shed some light on the case. First, they started with Alex Golub, Mark's good friend from basic training. For the most part, Alex said that Mark seemed completely normal throughout their friendship. However, there was one odd moment Alex mentioned that really stuck out to detectives.
Has Mark ever talked about killing people to you?
No, ma'am. Just the text that we did have. We were going to go spec ops together, and we were kind of looking at TAC B. And he mentioned in one of the texts that something like he'd be happy to get paid for killing people.
Exactly.
But I was just like, oh, I mean, that's a kind of like a huge thing. It's just a weird thing to say. So I was like, oh, that's just Gooch. And also, you know, it's the enemy. So I mean, I don't really take it as like he's wanting to kill innocents. It's more like the enemy.
Okay. These are exactly what you're referring to, probably. See that the highlighted conversation between you guys?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that what you were just talking about?
Let's go TAC B together. Yes, ma'am. Do you have the one where it says he? Yes.
Where it says, I would like to get paid to kill people.
Right.
And I don't have the next page, but from what I recall of that conversation, you didn't say, whoa, man, that's weird. Or, you guys kind of just went on.
I think I just typed his name in all caps, because that's what I would always say.
Okay.
If he said something just, like, strange.
While Alex laughed off Mark's comment, there's no denying that it's concerning. This text from Mark implies that he may have been harboring these sorts of morbid desires long before targeting Sasha.
It was about respect too. Like one guy in our sister class, he had his feet up on the desk one day, and Gooch was like, "Oh, you should probably get your feet off the desk." And the other dude made a snarky comment like, "Oh, you're telling me what to do," kind of thing now.
Yeah.
And I could tell that Gooch got pretty mad at that. I was like, calm down.
Okay.
From Alex's story about Mark, we can see some indications that Mark may struggle with anger control. The story is also indicative of excessive rigidity. People who are very rigid when it comes to social rules may often get into confrontations with others because they can't cope with seeing any rule-breaking behaviors they deem inappropriate. While this might seem contradictory at first, given the accusations against Mark, he may feel that the rules don't apply to him. This is a trait typically found in individuals with antisocial personality disorder.
How do you remember Mark reacting to stress?
Just stiff as a board, very disciplined. Never screamed back, never lost his cool, kind of thing.
Okay.
You'd see his face get red, but I thought he was just embarrassed.
Alex describes Mark as stiff as a board and mentions his face turning red. These traits, in conjunction with how we saw Mark acting during his interview, could be signs that he's emotionally cut off. This is another trait that's common among individuals with antisocial personality disorder and is tied to their overall lack of empathy. While these few indicators certainly aren't enough to give Mark a full diagnosis, they can give us some insight into how he might think. As investigators question those around Mark, they learn something very interesting that could blow this case wide open. According to Kemper Kepley, Mark's best friend at Luke Air Force Base, Mark had secretly kept a gun on base for several months. However, he'd recently given the gun to another friend to store off base. Detectives were quick to track this gun down and bring it in for testing, which showed that it was the same caliber as the bullet that killed Sasha. However, while the police were in possession of Mark's gun, the case took a turn none of the investigators were expecting.
I got a text just a few minutes ago from Sam Gooch that said Mark Gooch had said that I could help him out with his possessions.
The detective is fine with Kemper working with Sam to get some of Mark's belongings. However, he does have one request.
He starts asking about the gun. That's what we want to know about.
Right.
And,
Okay.
And don't, provide him any information that you know about the gun. If you can help that. So, we're asking you not to do that.
Within a week of this call with Kemper, detectives were notified that Sam had reached out to Jeremiah Levesque, the last person who had Mark's gun before it was given to the police. While working with Jeremiah, the police listened in on a phone call between him and Sam, where Sam made plans to travel across state lines to Arizona in order to dispose of Mark's gun before the police could get it. In the call, Sam told Jeremiah, "Considering what's going on, if you're comfortable, I would say get rid of the gun any way you deem fit. If not, I will deal with it whenever I get there." Jeremiah was then able to arrange a meetup point with Sam where they planned to trade Mark's gun. However, unbeknownst to Sam, Jeremiah had been given a replica gun by the police, and officers were going to be covertly hidden around the meetup site, waiting to make their arrest.
Target just pulled into the second parking spot.
Yeah, no problem. There you go, sir.
Hey, move. That's good. Hey, call it in.
I can't. My phone. Where's your phone? Target's getting back in his car.
He's got the gun.
Target has a gun.
He has it?
He has it. Let's go. Go.
Sheriff's office, get out of the car!
Get on the car.
Turn off the car! Step out now! Get your hands up! Step away from the car! Step towards me! Turn away from me now! Get on your knees! Get on your knees! Put your hands behind your head! Passenger, get out of the car! Passenger, in the back, get out of the car!
With their sting operation successful and Sam Gooch arrested, it was time for the detectives to find out why Sam was so set on disposing of Mark's gun. Detective Troy Short was sent in to interrogate Sam, and he was immediately met with resistance.
You want to start from the beginning and kind of...
I believe you think I know more than I do, and
So explain what that means. You know what I mean? If I know more than you do, help me understand that.
I don't think this is going to be a productive conversation for me, and
Do you want to tell me about tonight?
No, sir.
Okay. Do you want to tell me why you guys came halfway across the country to pick up a gun?
No, sir.
Okay. Do you understand why you're here in the room?
Yes, sir.
Here's the deal, Sam. A part of me even feels bad right now because, like I told you back in Wisconsin, you weren't a focus. You weren't a suspect.
Mm-hmm.
And now, because of some bad choices, you're in some serious trouble. Not as serious as Mark by any means. You know what I mean? He's in some serious trouble, and I tried to explain that to you back there. Is there anything you can do to help yourself right now, or help yourself out of this mess, or?
As much as I would like to, I frankly do not believe you have my best interest in mind.
Okay.
And I do not think discussing this with you would be helpful.
While Sam may be refusing to give the detective the answers he's looking for, he has yet to actually invoke his Miranda rights. Whether or not Sam knows this, refusing to answer a line of questioning is not enough to stop an interrogation and get a lawyer. We can see that Sam is being very cautious in how he responds to Detective Short. When he pauses to take a sip of water after being asked a question, it's likely that he was doing this as a stalling tactic to allow himself time to carefully pick his words. Sam appears to have some prior knowledge about interrogations, as he is correct that the detective doesn't have the suspect's best interests in mind. He appears reluctant to speak as he likely doesn't want to incriminate himself or his brother further by saying the wrong thing.
Why did he call you for this extended period of time on that specific day? Specifically the day that he's under arrest for murder. You know what I mean? Extensive amount of phone calls that day. For elaborate amount of time. Completely outside the norm of you guys' normal communication process. Why are you in Arizona? Why did you fly halfway across the country? Why did you obtain a new phone with a new phone number to do this? Why are you here picking up a gun that you know belongs to Mark? If you don't know what he did, then why would you do that?
We know what he allegedly did.
Okay, I understand that. So you know he allegedly murdered somebody?
Correct.
Okay, so why are you picking up a gun that belonged to him? Specifically, when I told you, when I interviewed you back in Wisconsin, do you know Mark has any guns? And you were like, nope. I don't think he's allowed to have one on base. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
So what's the deal?
I would like to collect all Mark's possessions as possible. If that gun is his possession, I would like to collect that as well.
Sam refuses to tell the detective why he tried to dispose of Mark's gun, but there are a few possible explanations. Mark claimed that Sam was his closest brother. It's possible that he called Sam and used their close relationship to convince Sam he had to get rid of the gun. Not because Mark killed someone, but because police thought he did. It's more than evident that Sam has a distrust of law enforcement, so it would make sense for Mark to prey upon this feeling in order to persuade his brother that if Sam didn't dispose of this weapon, the police were going to frame Mark for something he didn't do.
It's attempted destruction of evidence, attempted tampering with evidence, attempted hindering prosecution. I mean, there's 2 felonies in there. Like, this is a big deal. So do you want to help me understand it? Do you want to explain it to me? Do you want to...
I don't think so. What is next in this process?
The next part is you go down to jail.
Okay. The way I see it, talking and discussing this with you, you will only use it against me to make these charges stick, and to further incriminate Mark.
Since Sam clearly understands how his words could be used against him, it's odd that he's still agreeing to sit here rather than asking for an attorney or outright refusing to respond. It's possible that his curiosity got the better of him, and he wants to find out how much the detectives know about Mark's crime. It's also possible that Sam is afraid and feels that if he at least agrees to sit in the interrogation room, he may be able to dodge the consequences of having helped Mark. With Sam's interview at a stalemate, the detectives are forced to look elsewhere for information. Throughout their entire investigation, the one thing they haven't been able to deduce clearly is motive. Was this just a random killing? Or was there something more at play here? While it's clear that Mark had some sort of grudge against Mennonites, it made no sense that someone with no prior criminal history would suddenly plan an elaborate murder 6 hours away from their home and target someone they'd never even heard of before. At least that's what Detective Nagel thought until she spoke with some Mennonites from Wisconsin and discovered that Mark's past wasn't quite as clean as it seemed. In a phone interview with Mark's former pastor, James Luke Martin, Detective Nagel learned that no one at Mark's former church was surprised to learn that he'd now been arrested in connection with such a heinous crime, as Mark had a reputation for taking revenge on others. Mark had also allegedly been involved in several robberies at the church. When the church tried to punish him for his involvement, his parents stepped in and decided to leave the church for being too critical of Mark. However, this was not the end of Mark's criminal activities. While living with his sister in Pennsylvania, Mark was accused of stealing money from the local Mennonites. Soon after, everyone who accused Mark of stealing money discovered that their cars suspiciously stopped working. After investigating further, these Mennonites found that sand had been placed into the oil pans of their cars, causing their engines to stop working. While those affected weren't able to prove it was Mark who put the sand there, it doesn't seem like a coincidence given his interest in mechanics and apparent taste for revenge. Detective Nagel then spoke to Jonathan Martin, the son of Mark's pastor, who provided further examples of Mark getting caught stealing. Jonathan even said that when he was angry, Mark would prowl around the Mennonite community to see what he could find. After speaking with Jonathan's son, Detective Nagel learned that Mark had allegedly robbed the Martins' family store. However, charges were never pressed due to the fact that the store security camera had its memory card stolen, so there was never visual proof of Mark being the one who robbed the store. While there may not have been any evidence of Mark's involvement at the time of the robbery, Detective Nagel was able to actually find the security footage from that robbery on Mark's own phone, and it showed a man with Mark's height and build robbing the store. In one of the photos, a car that looked suspiciously like Mark's could be seen in the background. With these photos, Detective Nagel had what appeared to be tangible proof that these accusations against Mark weren't just hearsay. Eventually, the detective got a hold of Jared Ulrich, a man who claimed to be Mark's partner in crime in the past. Jared openly confessed to Detective Nagel about all the robberies he'd allegedly committed with Mark, and he described in detail how Mark would try to frame other people in the community for their crimes. There definitely seemed to be evidence that Jared may have been telling the truth, as a series of texts were found on Mark's phone, all of which had been recently deleted. In these texts, Mark talked to Sam about Jared never understanding the real cost of getting caught. Mark then asked Sam to remotely wipe Jared's phone, something that he also asked Sam to do to his own phone after he fell under suspicion for Sasha's murder. While all of this information against Mark was damning enough, there was still one more disturbing truth to learn. Through many more interviews, Detective Nagel was eventually put in contact with Andrew and Galen Headings, a pair of brothers who were close with Mark during his time in Wisconsin. Andrew recounted a time where he had confronted Mark for stealing, and during their conversation, Mark was so cold and bitter that Andrew said he feared for his life. Galen had an even more disturbing revelation for Detective Nagel, as he told her about Mark's alleged inappropriate actions towards women. According to Galen, Mark confessed to him that he had allegedly assaulted a young girl his sister was babysitting when he was around 10 to 13 years old. However, this claim has never been publicly proven, and there's no evidence of it being true. Still, with this information, it became clear that Mark always had the capacity to harm others, and allegedly had many times in the past. Mark's motive in harming Sasha was also more evident than ever. All the unfounded anger and resentment he had towards the Mennonite community had been steadily growing over the years, and as it did, Mark took his revenge against them further and further. Up to this point, charges had never been pressed against Mark, and he felt like he could outsmart anyone, even the police. With this misplaced confidence, Mark decided to see if he could get away with the ultimate crime, murder. It appears that Mark had gone to the Mennonite community that day in search of a victim, and tragically, Sasha was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mark grabbed her from her car late at night and no one saw a thing. Still, that didn't prevent him from getting caught. Unfortunately for him, while no one had previously pressed any charges for his theft, the state of Arizona was more than happy to charge Mark for Sasha's murder and put him on trial. Mark's trial began on September 24, 2021. In January of 2022, the jury found Mark guilty on charges of kidnapping and first-degree murder, earning him a life sentence. For his help in covering up Mark's crimes, Sam Gooch pleaded guilty and received 3 years probation. With both Sam and Mark dealt with, Sasha Krause and her family finally received the justice they deserve.
This tranquil landscape became the setting for a chilling mystery that would test the limits of modern investigative technology. Nancy Woodrum was a beloved 62-year-old grandmother, hairdresser, and horsewoman who lived alone on her secluded property known as Paradise Ranch. A devout Jehovah's Witness, Nancy was known for her kindness, her quiet faith, and her love for riding her horse, Montana, through the Golden Hills. She had recently decided to sell the ranch to devote her time fully to her faith and missionary work. On Saturday, May 5th, 2018, Nancy failed to appear for a scheduled Bible study, an absence that immediately alarmed her daughter, Amanda. When family members checked her small cottage on the property, they found a haunting scene. The front door was wide open, the television was blaring, and Nancy's purse, keys, and phone were left untouched on a bench. Closer inspection revealed large bloodstains on the floor and walls, and a missing set of bedsheets. The San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office quickly established a secure crime scene. Senior Deputy Clinton Cole arrived to coordinate the search, recognizing immediately that Nancy had been taken against her will. The investigation was uniquely complicated by the presence of a large wedding party staying in the main house on the property. Over 20 guests had been present during the window of her disappearance, yet none reported hearing anything unusual over the sound of the evening winds. A breakthrough occurred later that evening when a highway patrol officer discovered a bundle of blood-stained bedding and women's clothing discarded along a remote dirt road 6 miles away. Amanda confirmed the items belonged to her mother, confirming the dark reality that Nancy had been severely injured and transported from her home. Detectives methodically interviewed every wedding guest, contractor, and laborer who had access to the property, while several individuals initially drew suspicion, including a contractor with a financial dispute and Nancy's estranged son Chad. They were eventually cleared through detailed alibis and genetic testing. The lack of matches in the national database left investigators with an unknown male genetic profile recovered from a bloody handprint on Nancy's pillowcase. Facing a stalled investigation, the sheriff's department decided to employ a cutting-edge investigative tool, a Google geofence search warrant, by establishing a virtual boundary around Nancy's cottage during the precise hours of her disappearance, a timeline narrowed by an aborted 0-second emergency call at 12:17 in the morning. Investigators requested data on any active cellular devices within the zone. The results, which arrived after months of legal and technical processing, were definitive. A single device was active within the geofence at the exact hour of the crime. The subscriber information pointed directly to Carlo Fuentes Flores, a quiet, local painter who had recently completed work on Nancy's ranch. To those who knew him, Carlo was a polite, hard-working family man who had emigrated from Mexico, raised his daughter, and maintained an immaculate professional reputation. But as detectives conducted a deep analysis of his digital footprint, a much darker secret life emerged. His search history revealed a fixation with older women, escort services, and numerous self-shot videos of sexual encounters. Under close surveillance by a specialized operations unit, Carlo was followed to a local restaurant where he discarded a plastic soda bottle. Forensic analysts quickly extracted his genetic material from the bottle, finding a perfect match to the bloody handprint on Nancy's pillow. In December of 2018, Carlo was brought to the sheriff's station for interrogation. Confronted with the undeniable scientific evidence, his polite facade dissolved. He confessed to returning to the ranch in the middle of the night with the intent of sexually assaulting Nancy. He admitted to entering her room, raping her, and subsequently suffocating her with a pillow to prevent her from identifying him. In a quiet, emotional moment, Carlo offered to lead investigators to the location where he had left her body. He guided detectives on a long drive into the remote, barren expanses of the Carrizo Plain. In the fading light, amid the dry brush and scattered rocks, investigators recovered Nancy's remains. Rather than face a lengthy, public trial, Carlo Fuentes Flores entered a specialized plea of guilty to first-degree murder with special circumstances, waiving his right to appeal in exchange for a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. The resolution of the case brought a profound sense of relief to the Paso Robles community, though the pain of her absence remained. In the golden hills of Paradise Ranch, Amanda continues to ride her mother's horse, Montana, keeping her memory alive beneath the shade of the ancient oaks, a testament to a beautiful life that could never be truly diminished by the darkness it left behind. The anatomy of deception. The quiet corners of the American landscape often hold a beauty that seems almost eternal. From the rolling, golden hills of central California, where ancient oak trees cast long shadows over verdant vineyards, to the pristine, snow-capped peaks of Utah and the hard-working, community-centered neighborhoods of Indiana and Ohio, these places represent the heart of the country. In these communities, trust is not merely a courtesy, it is the fundamental currency of daily life. Neighbors know each other by name, doors are left unlocked, and a person's word is considered a sacred bond. Yet it is precisely within these serene settings that the most profound human tragedies can unfold. When the fabric of trust is torn by calculated malice, the impact is devastating, leaving scars that linger for generations. The pursuit of justice in the wake of such tragedies is a solemn and painstaking endeavor. It is a task that falls to dedicated investigators, forensic scientists, and community members who refuse to let the truth remain buried. The process of uncovering the truth is rarely swift or easy. It requires a meticulous examination of physical evidence, a deep understanding of human psychology, and an unwavering commitment to the memory of the victims. This narrative explores 4 remarkable cases where the dark undercurrents of human nature clashed with the relentless pursuit of truth. It is a testament to the resilience of families who survived the unimaginable, the ingenuity of law enforcement officers who refused to give up, and the ultimate triumph of light over the deepest shadows of deception. Book 1. The Pass of the Oaks. In the heart of San Luis Obispo County, halfway between the bustling metropolises of San Francisco and Los Angeles lies the picturesque town of Paso Robles. The original Spanish name, El Paso de Robles, translates to the Pass of the Oaks, a fitting description for a landscape defined by rolling hills, majestic oak trees, and sprawling vineyards. It is a place of natural elegance, a sanctuary where visitors go to escape the frenetic pace of modern life. For decades, the town maintained a quiet, agrarian charm defined by cattle ranches and horse farms before evolving into one of the premier wine-producing regions in the country. To many, it felt like a fairy tale location, a place where nothing truly terrible could ever happen. Yet, down El Faro Road, nestled in a secluded portion of this beautiful valley, sat a property known as Paradise Ranch. The estate was a labor of love. A beautiful Victorian home with wraparound porches shaded by a massive, weeping willow tree. The owner of this ranch-style property was 62-year-old Nancy Woodrum. Nancy was a beloved fixture in the Paso Robles community. She was a gifted hairstylist who ran a popular downtown salon called The Strand, where clients went not just for her talent, but for her warmth, her generosity, and her open heart. Nancy had a unique ability to connect with everyone she met, leaving a lasting impression of kindness. Beyond her professional life, Nancy was a woman of deep faith and passion. She was a devout Jehovah's Witness who spent her free time sharing her spiritual hope with others. She loved animals, particularly horses, and found a deep sense of peace riding through the scenic trails of the Central Coast. Her daughter, Amanda, shared her mother's passion for hairdressing and horseback riding, and the two shared an exceptionally close bond. Following the death of her husband, Robert, several years prior, Nancy continued to manage the beautiful property on El Faro Road, eventually deciding to list the main house as a vacation rental, while she resided in a quaint, attached guest cottage. On Friday, the 4th of May, 2018, a large group of more than 20 wedding guests checked into the main house at Paradise Ranch. They were in town to celebrate a wedding at a local winery, and the charming estate seemed like the perfect setting for their weekend festivities. Nancy met the bride and bridesmaids, welcoming them with her characteristic warmth and a gentle hug, mentioning that she would be staying nearby on the property if they needed anything. It was a joyful weekend, filled with laughter and preparation for the big day. By Saturday morning, however, a quiet unease began to settle over those close to Nancy. Amanda received a phone call from a member of her mother's congregation, expressing concern that Nancy had uncharacteristically failed to appear for a scheduled morning Bible study. This was highly unusual for a woman of Nancy's disciplined devotion. Sensing that something was wrong, Amanda asked a neighbor to go over to the cottage on El Faro Road to check on her. The neighbor arrived to find a scene that was instantly chilling. The front door of Nancy's cottage was wide open, and the television inside was blaring. There was no sign of Nancy. When Amanda arrived and stepped inside the cottage, her heart sank. The home was exactly as her mother had left it, with her purse, car, keys, cellular phone, and digital tablet still sitting on a bench near the entrance. Her 2 vehicles remained parked outside. Yet, Nancy was gone. A closer inspection of the bedroom revealed a horrifying reality. The sheets and bedding were missing from the mattress. On the carpet, there was a large, dark stain, and upon looking closer at the walls, Amanda saw what appeared to be blood spatter. On a remaining beige pillow, there was a significant amount of blood. Panic and dread set in. Amanda immediately reached for the phone and dialed 911. The emergency dispatch call went out, and within minutes, the peaceful vacation rental was transformed into a highly active crime scene. Yellow tape was strung across the property, and law enforcement vehicles lined the driveway. For the wedding guests in the main house, the holiday was abruptly shattered. They found themselves surrounded by police officers, search dogs, and a helicopter circling overhead. To many, the situation felt like something out of a classic mystery novel, a secluded estate where everyone present was a potential suspect. Among the responding officers was Clinton Cole, an experienced senior deputy with the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office. Upon arriving at the secluded property, Cole met with the first responding deputies, who confirmed that the circumstances were extremely suspicious. As Cole walked through Nancy's cottage, his investigative instincts told him immediately that this was not a simple missing persons case. The lack of forced entry suggested Nancy may have been surprised in the middle of the night. The presence of her purse, keys, and phone indicated she had not left voluntarily. The blood spatter on the headboard, the wall, and the cabinet spoke of a violent struggle. It was clear to Cole that Nancy had been assaulted and taken against her will. As the initial search began on the property, investigators received a crucial phone call from an officer with the California Highway Patrol. Approximately 6 to 7 miles away, along the rural expanse of La Ponza Road, a motorist had spotted several items discarded on the shoulder of the road. Upon inspection, officers discovered a collection of bedding, a pillow, a woman's dress, a pair of shorts, and a shirt. The bedding, featuring a distinct gingham print, appeared to match the remaining decor in Nancy's bedroom. More concerningly, the items were stained with what appeared to be blood. The discarded items were rushed to the sheriff's forensic laboratory. Amanda was asked to view the clothing and bedding, and with a heavy heart, she confirmed they belonged to her mother. The discovery painted a grim picture. It suggested that Nancy had been wrapped in her own bedding and transported away from her home, either severely injured or deceased. The urgency of the investigation multiplied. With a potential suspect pool of more than 20 wedding guests staying on the property, detectives faced a monumental task. They needed to interview every person who had been at Paradise Ranch on the night of Nancy's disappearance. The process was painstaking, requiring detectives to balance the need for thorough investigation with the chaotic reality of a wedding weekend. Many of the guests had children, and the restriction of access to the main house created significant logistical challenges. During the initial processing of the driveway, Detective Cole noticed 2 fresh tire tracks that pulled into the dirt area near Nancy's cottage. Nearby, in the soil, there were distinct scuffle marks, suggesting a physical struggle had taken place outside the home. The physical evidence was speaking loudly, but the identity of the perpetrator remained shrouded in mystery. Inside the cottage, forensic investigators examined the bloody pillow found on the bed. Using a specialized light source and looking from an elevated angle, investigator Janine noticed a faint, partial handprint impressed in the blood. The pattern stood out clearly. One side of the pillow contained a heavy accumulation of blood, while the other side bore the distinct impression of a hand, suggesting the pillow may have been used to smother or restrain the victim. Investigators carefully swabbed the area of the handprint to extract genetic material, hoping to create a profile of the suspect. The sample was sent to a laboratory for urgent analysis. As detectives began interviewing the wedding guests, they sought to establish timelines and alibis for the night of Friday, the 4th of May. Most of the guests had attended a rehearsal dinner at a local winery, returning to the property late in the evening. However, one guest's whereabouts could not be immediately and fully accounted for. This guest, a man from Northern California, had not attended the rehearsal dinner, choosing instead to remain at the property. During initial phone conversations with detectives, his attitude became defensive and uncooperative, raising immediate red flags. Determined to resolve this lead, detectives traveled to the guest's residence in Northern California. Upon arrival, they found a completely different man than the one who had spoken to them on the phone. He was cooperative, apologized for his previous tone, and allowed his wife to show investigators photos from her phone confirming that he had indeed attended the latter part of the dinner. To ensure complete clearance, the guest voluntarily provided a sample of his genetic material. When the laboratory results returned, his genetic profile did not match the material found on the bloody pillow. Meanwhile, the community of Paso Robles rallied around Nancy's family. Search and rescue teams, utilizing helicopters, dogs, and volunteers, combed the rugged foothills, culverts, and the dry riverbed behind Nancy's property. Amanda and her friends spent days searching along rural roads, clinging to the hope that Nancy, a known fighter, was still alive and waiting to be found. As the search continued, detectives compiled a list of other individuals who had access to Paradise Ranch. Nancy had recently decided to sell the property to dedicate her time to her faith, and several contractors, painters, and plumbers had been working on the estate to finalize the sale. Detectives systematically located and interviewed each of these individuals. One name that surfaced was Sean Bloom, a general contractor who had performed extensive work on the property. Amanda informed investigators that Nancy and Bloom had experienced a highly contentious dispute over the quality of his work and the terms of payment. The disagreement had escalated to the point where Nancy fired Bloom, who then threatened legal action to secure his funds.
Bloom
was interviewed by detectives and openly admitted his dislike for Nancy, sharing the tense text messages they had exchanged. However, he eventually agreed to provide a sample of his genetic material. The analysis cleared him of any connection to the crime scene. Detectives also examined Nancy's personal life, looking for any potential conflicts closer to home. They learned that Nancy had an estranged son, Chad, who had disconnected from the family years prior due to disagreements regarding their faith. Text records revealed that Nancy had reached out to Chad on the night before her disappearance, attempting to find common ground.
Chad was
cooperative when interviewed at his home, but adamantly refused to provide a sample of his genetic material, citing personal privacy concerns. Detectives placed Chad under surveillance, eventually retrieving several empty beer bottles he had discarded. The genetic profile extracted from the bottles did not match the material on the bloody pillow, clearing him as well. Months passed, and the investigation began to stall. Detectives had exhausted nearly every conventional lead, and the public was growing anxious, fearing that a dangerous predator remained at large. In their determination, investigators decided to utilize a relatively new digital forensic tool, one that had never been used by their department before: a Google geofence. A geofence allows investigators to establish a virtual boundary around a specific geographic area during a precise window of time. By securing a search warrant, detectives could request Google to identify any mobile devices that connected to their location services within that boundary.
The technique was
highly specialized, but the investigators possessed a critical piece of data that made it viable: an interrupted 911 call. An analysis of Nancy's cellular phone records revealed that a call to 911 had been attempted from her phone at precisely 12:17 in the morning on Saturday, the 5th of May. The call had lasted for 0 seconds, suggesting it had been disconnected almost instantly. This provided detectives with an incredibly precise time and date stamp for the attack. When Google returned the geofence data, investigators began the meticulous process of sorting through the device identifiers. Because Paradise Ranch was located in a remote, rural area, the number of active devices was remarkably small. Detectives identified the devices belonging to the wedding guests, most of which were inactive or in silent mode during the early morning hours. However, as they focused on Nancy's cottage, they noticed a single mobile device that pinged within the structure at 1:33 and again at 1:52 in the morning. This was the exact window when Nancy is believed to have been taken from the property. The device did not belong to Nancy, nor did it belong to any of the registered guests. Detectives secured a subsequent warrant to obtain the subscriber information for the mysterious device. In November, 6 months after Nancy's disappearance, the results arrived. The device belonged to Carlo Fuentes Flores. The name was immediately recognized by investigators. Carlo Fuentes Flores was a local painter who had been hired to paint the decks and trim of the main house at Paradise Ranch. He had been interviewed briefly early in the investigation, presenting himself as a mild-mannered, polite family man with no criminal record in either the United States or Mexico. He had even shared a story of how kind Nancy had been to him, offering him a tamale while he worked. Now, the digital evidence placed his phone inside Nancy's cottage at the very hour of her abduction. Yet, a geofence hit alone was not enough to secure an arrest. Detectives needed to prove that Carlo himself was in possession of the phone and that he was directly linked to the physical evidence inside the
cottage.
A surveillance team was assigned to follow Carlo. They watched as he went about his daily routine, eventually observing him having lunch with his wife at a local restaurant. When Carlo left the restaurant, detectives recovered a plastic Coca-Cola bottle he had discarded. The bottle was rushed to the laboratory and the genetic material extracted from it was compared to the profile obtained from the bloody handprint on the pillow. It was a match. The scientific certainty provided investigators with the leverage they needed. On a cold morning, detectives invited Carlo to the sheriff's station under the pretense of clarifying some details about his painting work at the ranch.
The
interrogation was led by Detective Cole and his partner, Dave. Initially, Carlo was cooperative, describing his work on the property and claiming he had no knowledge of what had happened to Nancy. He even denied knowing where her guest cottage was located. Detectives slowly began to apply pressure, showing him photographs of the property and pointing out inconsistencies in his statements. They let him know that they had conducted an exhaustive investigation and possessed irrefutable scientific evidence, placing him in the room. The shift in the room was palpable. Carlo's body language changed. He began to sweat, and his heart could be seen beating rapidly against his shirt. Realizing that his denials were useless, he looked at the detectives and said, "I want to be honest with you guys. I know that I made a mistake." Carlo initially tried to portray the incident as a tragic accident. He claimed he had returned to the property in the middle of the night to retrieve a ladder for a job the next day. While backing up his truck, he claimed he did not see Nancy walking behind his vehicle and accidentally ran her over. He insisted that he had carried her inside her cottage to help her, where she subsequently
collapsed.
Detectives, however, knew the physical evidence contradicted this story.
The
blood spatter on the headboard and the partial handprint on the pillow did not align with the vehicular accident. They pushed further, questioning him about the nature of the assault. Carlo eventually admitted to a far more sinister reality. He confessed that he had traveled to the property with the intention of sexually assaulting Nancy.
He
entered her cottage, attacked her in her bed, and subsequently raped her.
To
prevent her from reporting the crime, he held a pillow over her face for 45 minutes until she stopped breathing. The confession was a chilling confirmation of their worst fears, but a critical question remained. Where was Nancy? Detectives brought a digital tablet into the interrogation room, hoping Carlo could point to a location on a map. Instead, Carlo looked at the officers and offered to lead them directly to her remains. They placed Carlo in an unmarked vehicle and began an hour-long journey due east. From the station, the landscape shifted from the fertile vineyards of Paso Robles to the arid, desolate topography of the Carrizo Plain. The area was vast and featureless, covered in dry brush and sweeping grasslands.
Detectives,
worried that Carlo would be unable to find the precise location in the darkening afternoon, Carlo directed them to several different spots, growing increasingly frustrated. As the search proved unsuccessful, doubt began to creep into the minds of the investigators. Finally, at a fifth location, Detective Cole looked out across the brush and noticed a small, stacked circle of rocks that appeared completely out of place in the natural landscape. Cole turned to Carlo and asked if those were the rocks he had described.
Carlo
Looked, fell to his knees, and began to cry, confirming the location. Investigators approached the site and discovered partial human remains, including a skull scattered by animal activity but preserved enough for recovery. The recovery of Nancy's remains brought a profound sense of closure to her family, though it was accompanied by immense grief. Carlo was placed under arrest and charged with first-degree murder with special circumstances. In the months leading to the trial, Carlo's defense team filed a motion to suppress his confession, arguing that because he was a native Spanish speaker, his Miranda warnings should have been administered in Spanish. However, prosecutors presented evidence that Carlos spoke excellent English, as demonstrated in his recorded jail phone calls with his wife. The judge denied the motion, ruling that the detectives had fully respected and preserved his constitutional rights. Rather than face a public trial, Carlo agreed to a legal proceeding known as a slow plea. He allowed the judge to review all of the evidence, including his recorded confession and jail calls, leading to a guaranteed finding of guilt on all charges without subjecting his family and Nancy's loved ones to a lengthy trial. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Amanda and the Paso Robles community, the pain of Nancy's loss remains, but her memory is honored daily. Hundreds of people attended a beautiful memorial held at a nearby vineyard, celebrating a woman whose life was defined by love, faith, and kindness. Today, Amanda continues to ride her mother's horse, Montana, passing down the traditions and the spirit of a mother who was taken too soon, but whose legacy of grace remains unbroken in the quiet hills of the Pass of the Oaks. Book 2, The Mourning Author. High in the majestic mountains of northern Utah, near the famous resort town of Park City, lies the quiet community of Calmas. Known for its stunning natural beauty, outdoor recreation, and close-knit population, it is a place where families go to build lives surrounded by nature. It was here that Eric Richens A 39-year-old father of three had built a successful stonemasonry business called C&E Masonry. Eric was a dynamic, hard-working man who loved the outdoors, hunting, and his three young sons. He was deeply devoted to his faith as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and was a beloved coach and mentor in the community. Eric was married to Corey Richens, a charming and ambitious young woman who ran a real estate flipping business called K. Richens Realty. Corey had grown up in the area, working her way up from cleaning houses to managing multiple high-profile home renovation projects. To the outside world, they were the picture-perfect all-American family living in a beautiful home, taking lavish vacations, and raising three active boys. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic life, a dark and complex story was unfolding. On the night of March 3rd, 2022, Corey claimed she and Eric were celebrating a major success for her business. She had recently signed a contract to purchase a massive, unfinished estate in Midway, Utah, for nearly $3 million, a project she hoped would solidify her status among the wealthy elite. To celebrate, Corey said she prepared a mixed drink for Eric in their bedroom. A few hours later, at approximately 3 o'clock in the morning on March 4th, Corey placed a frantic call to 911. She reported that she had been sleeping in her son's room after he had a night terror and, upon returning to her master bedroom, found Eric cold to the touch and unresponsive. Emergency responders arrived quickly, finding Eric on the floor of the bedroom. Despite their efforts to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation, Eric was pronounced deceased at the scene. The responding paramedics noted a surprising amount of blood near his mouth, leading to an initial hypothesis that he may have suffered a brain aneurysm or internal hemorrhage. As the community mourned the sudden loss of a healthy, active young man, Corey presented herself as a devastated, grieving widow. She spoke of the profound struggle of helping her three young boys process the sudden death of their father. To cope with their collective grief, Corey claimed she could find no suitable children's books on the subject, inspiring her to write one herself. She self-published a children's book titled Are You With Me?, which featured a touching story of a young boy wondering if his deceased father was still present in his life. Corey dedicated the book to her amazing husband, and she appeared on local television and radio stations to promote it, earning widespread sympathy as a resilient, loving mother navigating tragedy. However, the scientific reality of Eric's death was about to shatter this carefully constructed narrative. The county medical examiner performed an autopsy and conducted a detailed toxicological analysis of Eric's system. The results were shocking. Eric had not died of an aneurysm. He had died of acute drug intoxication caused by a massive dose of fentanyl. The toxicology report indicated that Eric's system contained 5 times the lethal limit of fentanyl, and significantly, the substance was identified as illicitly manufactured, non-medical grade fentanyl. This was not a drug. Prescribed by a doctor, it was a potent street drug. The discovery launched a major criminal investigation led by the Summit County Sheriff's Office. Investigators began digging into the couple's personal and financial lives, uncovering a history of severe strain and deception.
They
learned that Eric's family had been immediately suspicious of Corey following his death. In 2020, Eric had discovered that Corey had secretly taken out a $250,000 line of credit against their family home, which he solely owned, and had spent the funds without his knowledge. This discovery had devastated Eric, breaking the trust in their marriage and prompting him to secretly consult a divorce attorney. To protect his children and his business, Eric had worked with an estate planner to establish a private trust. He named his sister, Katie, as the executor of his estate and designated his 3 sons as the sole beneficiaries, effectively cutting Corey out of his financial legacy. Corey only learned of this arrangement 2 days after Eric's death, resulting in a physical altercation with Eric's sister over the family safe, for which Corey was subsequently charged with assault. As detectives searched for the source of the lethal fentanyl, they discovered that Eric had expressed fears for his safety prior to his death. In 2019, during a trip to Greece, Eric had become violently ill after drinking a beverage prepared by Corey because he was taking medication for Lyme disease that interacted poorly with alcohol. He had ordered a non-alcoholic drink, but believed Corey had intentionally slipped alcohol into it. He had called his sister, expressing his belief that his wife had tried to poison him. More recently, on Valentine's Day of 2022, just weeks before his death, Corey had purchased a bagel sandwich for Eric from a local diner. After taking a single bite, Eric suffered a severe allergic reaction, requiring him to use his son's epinephrine auto-injector and take antihistamines before falling into a deep sleep. He texted his friends the next morning, stating, "I think she tried to poison me." To uncover how Corey could have obtained the illicit fentanyl, investigators hired a private investigator who analyzed phone records. They discovered that Corey had been in constant communication with a woman named Carmen Lauber, who worked as a cleaner for Corey's real estate projects and possessed a history of drug-related offenses. Detectives executed a search warrant at Carmen's residence, where they discovered drug paraphernalia and, chillingly, a copy of Eric's obituary taped to a mirror. Facing significant prison time on drug and weapons charges, Carmen agreed to cooperate with investigators. Carmen revealed that Corey had asked her to procure strong pain medication for her on 2 separate occasions in early 2022. Carmen purchased the pills from a local dealer, Robert Crozier, and left them for Corey at one of her renovation properties. According to Carmen, after the first delivery, Corey complained that the pills were not strong enough and requested something more potent, which Carmen subsequently delivered just days before Eric's death. The financial investigation revealed that Corey was facing a desperate situation. She was in debt for more than $4 million, largely due to her ambitious purchase of the unfinished Midway mansion and various short-term, high-interest loans. She had also defrauded her close friend, Chelsea Barney, of $45,000, leading to the foreclosure and loss of Chelsea's home. Corey had believed that Eric's death would provide her with a significant financial windfall through life insurance and his estate, unaware that he had altered his trust. In May of 2023, Corey was arrested and charged with aggravated murder and possession of illicit substances with the intent to distribute. Her defense team argued that the prosecution's case was purely circumstantial and that there was no physical evidence proving she had administered the drug to Eric. While in jail awaiting trial, a search of Corey's cell revealed a highly suspicious 4-page letter written by her, addressed to her mother. The letter, titled Walk the Dog, instructed her family to contact her brother and have him provide false testimony claiming that Eric had obtained fentanyl from Mexico. Prosecutors argued this was clear evidence of witness tampering, while Corey insisted it was merely a draft for a fictional manuscript. In March of 2024, prosecutors amended the charges to include attempted murder for the Valentine's Day bagel incident. They also uncovered evidence that Corey had been having a long-term affair with a handyman, Josh Grossman, texting him shortly before Eric's death that she wanted a future together and that her life would be perfect if her husband went away. The trial began in Summit County, drawing intense media attention. The prosecution presented a powerful case detailing Corey's massive debt, her secret affair, and her efforts to procure fentanyl. Carmen Lauber and Robert Crozier testified about the drug transactions, while Corey's childhood friend, Allie Stakings, testified about Eric's fears of being poisoned. The most dramatic moment came when Josh Grossman took the stand. He described his deep affection for Corey and recounted a chilling conversation they had after Eric's death, in which Corey asked him if he had ever killed anyone during his military service and how it made him feel. In a move that stunned the courtroom, the defense rested their case without calling a single witness, confident that the prosecution had not met the high burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. After less than 3 hours of deliberation, the 8-member jury returned with a unanimous verdict. Corey Richens was found guilty of aggravated murder and all remaining charges. She faces a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Eric's family, the verdict brought a profound sense of justice and closure. Though the loss of a devoted father and brother remains a deep wound today, Eric's 3 sons are being raised in a loving environment by his sister, surrounded by the memories of a father who loved them above all else, while the woman who tried to write her own version of the story faces the permanent reality of her actions behind bars. Book 3: The Echo of the Sirens. The city of Evansville, Indiana, sits on the scenic banks of the Ohio River, a place of historic charm and strong community bonds. It is a city where first responders are held in the highest regard, their dedication to public safety forming the backbone of the community. Robert Robbie Dorr was a symbol of this. Dedication. A 28-year veteran of the Evansville Fire Department, Robbie was a respected leader, a mentor to young firefighters, and a true hero who had once saved a child from a burning building. He was a man of integrity, known for his infectious laugh and his generous spirit. Robbie was married to Elizabeth Becky Fox Dorr, a stay-at-home mother who had been adopted into the community as a child. They had been married for only 6 months, living in a quiet home on Oakley Street. To many, it seemed like Robbie had finally found the stable, happy family life he had always wanted, helping to raise Elizabeth's children and enjoying his role as a husband. On the cold night of February 26, 2019, Robbie returned home after completing a long, 12-hour shift at the fire department. As he pulled his truck into the driveway, headlights illuminating the quiet street, a series of sudden, sharp popping sounds shattered the silence. Inside the house, Elizabeth was reportedly preparing dinner, making macaroni and cheese and pork chops. Upon hearing the sounds, she looked out the back door and saw her husband's headlights. She rushed outside to find Robbie lying on the concrete driveway, bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds. A flurry of 911 calls came in from neighbors reporting shots fired. Elizabeth also called, screaming that her husband was unresponsive and covered in blood. Emergency personnel arrived within minutes, finding Robbie with a pulse but severely injured, despite their rapid efforts to perform chest compressions and transport him to the hospital. Robbie was pronounced deceased. The news of Robbie's death sent shockwaves through the Evansville Fire Department and the broader community. Dozens of firefighters arrived at the scene, devastated by the loss of one of their own. A solemn procession of fire trucks escorted his body to the coroner's office, a silent tribute to a fallen brother. The initial investigation, led by detectives with the Evansville Police Department, faced an immediate challenge. There were no shell casings found at the scene. This suggested the killer had either meticulously collected the casings or had used a weapon that did not eject them, such as a revolver. During the autopsy, the forensic pathologist recovered several unique projectiles from Robbie's body. The ammunition was a highly unusual mixture of jacketed bullets, ball projectiles, and plastic wadding. A firearms expert examined the evidence and concluded that the weapon used was likely a Taurus Judge, a distinct, large-bore revolver capable of firing both traditional handgun ammunition and shotgun shells from the same cylinder. This critical piece of forensic data gave investigators a specific target. They began searching records of stolen firearms in the area and discovered that a Taurus Judge had recently been reported stolen from a local pawn shop, River City Pawn. Crucially, a young employee of the pawn shop, Larry Richmond Jr., had access to the inventory. Detectives placed Richmond Jr. under surveillance and discovered a photograph on his phone showing him posing with a Taurus Judge in his lap. More significantly, investigators looked into his father, Larry Richmond Sr. Larry Richmond Sr. was a convicted murderer who had recently been released on probation after serving 20 years in prison. Richmond Sr. was living with his fiancée, Amanda Fillmore, who happened to be the younger sister of Elizabeth Fox Dorr. The families were closely linked, often spending holidays together and attending social gatherings. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a hidden web of financial strain and personal betrayal. Elizabeth had been spending heavily, purchasing a new vehicle, furniture, and appliances, which had maxed out Robbie's credit cards and created severe tension in their brief marriage. Robbie had grown increasingly insecure, suspecting that Elizabeth was hiding her phone and deleting text messages. On the night of the murder, phone records revealed that Elizabeth had received a call from Larry Richmond Sr. that lasted over 4 minutes, ending just minutes before Robbie pulled into the driveway and was shot. Elizabeth had immediately deleted the call log from her phone, a fact she hid from investigators during her initial interviews. When confronted with the raw data from the carrier, she claimed she had simply deleted it out of habit and did not want police to think she was having an affair. Investigators also learned from Elizabeth's son, Nathan, that on the very night of Robbie's murder, Elizabeth had asked about his fire department pension and life insurance benefits. The following morning, she visited the fire station to formally inquire about the financial payout, raising immediate suspicions among Robbie's fellow firefighters. In a separate interview, Larry Richmond Jr. revealed to detectives that his father had buried a container of weapons in the backyard of the home he shared with Amanda. Surveillance video from a neighboring property confirmed that Larry Richmond Sr. had walked into the yard with a box and a shovel, returning empty-handed. Police executed a search warrant at the property, excavating the backyard near a fire pit. They recovered a plastic container containing several firearms. Although the specific murder weapon, the Taurus Judge, was not among them. However, the discovery of the buried weapons provided sufficient evidence to charge Richmond Sr. with federal weapons violations, keeping him in custody. While the murder investigation continued, the breakthrough in the homicide case came through the meticulous work of the high-tech crime unit. Investigators had seized Richmond Sr.'s locked iPhone, but were unable to access its contents without a passcode. Using advanced digital forensic tools and running specialized algorithms, technicians worked for nearly 8 months before successfully cracking the passcode. The digital evidence recovered from the phone was devastating. Location data placed Richmond Sr.'s phone in the immediate vicinity of Robbie's home on Oakley Street in the hour leading up to the murder. The data showed his phone moving through the alley behind the residence, positioned to ambush Robbie the moment he arrived. The records also showed the active communication between Richmond Sr. and Elizabeth, coordinating Robbie's expected arrival time. Richmond Sr. had powered his phone off immediately before the shooting, turning it back on a few minutes later at a nearby Circle K gas station, where surveillance video showed him dressed in a sleeveless shirt despite the freezing February temperatures. Further evidence came from a jailhouse informant, Muhammad, who had shared a cell with Richmond Sr. Muhammad testified that Richmond Sr. had confessed to the killing, explaining that he and Elizabeth had planned to eliminate Robbie to secure his pension and life insurance funds, which they intended to split to start a new life together. In 2021, both Elizabeth Fox Dorr and Larry Richmond Sr. were formally charged with murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Elizabeth was tried first. Her defense team argued that the prosecution's case was based on circumstantial evidence and a deleted phone call, with no direct proof that she had participated in the planning of the crime. However, the prosecution presented a compelling timeline of the digital evidence, Elizabeth's immediate focus on the pension, and her efforts to conceal her communication with Richmond Sr. Her son, Nathan, took the stand, delivering emotional testimony about his mother's focus on the financial benefits of Robbie's death. The jury deliberated for over 4 hours before returning with a verdict of guilty on all counts. Elizabeth was sentenced to 90 years in prison, ensuring she would spend the remainder of her life behind bars. Larry Richmond Sr.'s trial followed. His defense claimed his presence in the area was coincidental, but the overwhelming location data and the testimony of his own son, who described seeing his father kiss Elizabeth, convinced the jury of his guilt. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. For Robbie's daughter, Lindsay, and his fellow firefighters, the convictions brought a long-awaited sense of peace. The Evansville Fire Department dedicated their newest fire engine in honor of Robbie, ensuring his legacy of service and bravery would continue to roll through the streets he protected. Though his physical presence is gone, the memory of his heroic spirit remains a guiding light for the community he loved. Book 4. The Mask in the Ashes. The town of Willard, Ohio, is a quiet, hard-working railway hub where families have lived for generations. It is a place defined by its industrial heritage and its rural surroundings, where major crimes are rare and deeply felt.
It was
here in October of 2001 that the community was shaken by the mysterious disappearance of 27-year-old Regina Rowe Hicks. Regina was a vibrant, independent young woman, a devoted mother to her 4-year-old son, Montana. She had recently separated from her husband, Paul Hicks, following a suspicious fire at their home during which they had split $60,000 in insurance proceeds. With her portion of the funds, Regina had purchased a distinctive white Camaro and had filed for divorce, seeking a fresh start and complete independence. On the evening of October 18, 2001, Regina was scheduled to pick up her son from Paul, who was staying at the home of his close friend, Stephen Gates. Regina had plans to drop her son off with her mother before enjoying a night out with her new boyfriend, Mikey Perkins. She never arrived to pick up Montana. Her family immediately knew something was wrong. Regina was a deeply loving mother who would never abandon her child. A search began, with family and friends combing the rural roads of Huron County, searching for any sign of her white Camaro. 4 days later, a farmer riding an all-terrain vehicle near a secluded, deep pond on his property noticed an unusual object submerged in the water. He contacted the sheriff's office, and a dive team was dispatched to the scene. Divers discovered the white Camaro, completely submerged, with a body inside. When the vehicle was pulled from the water, investigators found Regina's body in the passenger seat, caked in mud. Her positioning was highly unusual, with her feet tucked beneath the passenger side console, suggesting she had not been driving when the vehicle entered the water. An autopsy revealed that Regina had suffered 3 distinct strikes to the top of her scalp, which were sufficient to incapacitate her, but not kill her.
More
Significantly, the pathologist discovered water and silt in her nasal cavity and lungs, proving she was still alive and breathing when the car was submerged.
She
had drowned while unconscious. The positioning of the driver's seat, which was pushed completely back to accommodate a much larger driver, further confirmed that someone else had driven the car into the pond. A distinct mud swipe on the interior passenger door indicated that her body had been pushed into the passenger side after she was injured. Paul Hicks was immediately identified as a primary person of interest.
He
provided investigators with an alibi, claiming he and his friend, Stephen Gates, had waited for Regina at Gates' home, but she had never arrived.
Paul suggested
that Regina's death was likely drug-related, claiming she had been involved in illicit activities, an allegation her family strongly denied. Without direct forensic evidence, such as fingerprints or genetic material connecting Paul to the interior of the vehicle, the case began to grow cold. For over a decade, Regina's mother, Losella, fought tirelessly for justice, placing billboards throughout the county and speaking to local news outlets before eventually passing away from cancer without receiving the answers she desperately sought. The case remained unsolved until June of 2015, when a massive structure fire occurred at an investment property owned by Paul Hicks in Goshen, Ohio, nearly 100 miles away. The fire had completely destroyed the home, but investigators recovered a digital video recording system that had survived inside a fireproof safe. The surveillance footage was highly unusual. It showed a man in a protective Tyvek suit and a woman with long, curly blonde hair carrying a television out of the home before pouring gasoline throughout the structure and igniting it.
Paul
Hicks immediately identified the woman as his ex-girlfriend, Kelly, with whom he was involved in a bitter custody battle over their young son. He showed police a prior recording of Kelly damaging his hot tub, featuring the same distinct
hair.
Based on Paul's identification and a series of harassing phone calls reportedly received from her number, Kelly was arrested. However, a diligent insurance investigator, Zachary McCune, began to look closer at the evidence, sensing that the scenario was far too calculated. An analysis of Kelly's actual phone records revealed that she had not made the hundreds of calls Paul claimed to have received. Instead, investigators discovered that a digital application called Spoof Card had been used to fake her number. The IP address used to access the application was traced to a mobile phone purchased under the name of another woman who had previously dated Paul. A search of this woman's financial records revealed two stunning purchases.
The
first was for a custom-made, highly realistic latex mask purchased from a website called That's My Face, created using photos of Kelly's face that had been extracted from Paul's phone. The second purchase was for a long, curly, blonde wig identical to Kelly's hair. The discovery revealed an incredibly elaborate frame-up.
Paul Hicks had
apparently hired an accomplice to wear the custom mask and wig deliberately, presenting her face to the surveillance cameras to ensure Kelly would be blamed for the arson, allowing him to secure sole custody of their son and defraud the insurance company of $400,000. While Paul was ultimately convicted of insurance fraud and placed on probation, the revelation of his extraordinary capacity for calculation and deception caught the attention of cold case investigators at the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. They realized that the patterns of control, domestic abuse, and custody disputes in Paul's subsequent relationships mirrored the circumstances surrounding Regina's death in 2001. Simultaneously, a local true crime podcaster, Ashley Ford, began dedicating episodes of her program, allegedly, to Regina's case. Her independent research highlighted the role of Paul's best friend, Stephen Gates, who had provided Paul's alibi on the night of the murder. Faced with renewed attention and a relentless investigation by the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, Stephen Gates consulted an attorney and agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for transactional immunity. After 24 years of silence, Gates finally revealed the truth. Gates admitted that on the night of October 18, 2001, Regina had indeed arrived at his property to pick up her son. She and Paul had engaged in a violent argument in the driveway. Gates claimed he had retreated to his garage to avoid the confrontation, turning on a tractor and his radio to drown out the noise. When he emerged, he saw Regina's white Camaro parked near the road. Paul Hicks was standing by the open passenger door. Gates looked inside and saw Regina's unconscious body crumpled on the floorboard. When he urged Paul to call 911, Paul threatened him, stating that Gates was now an accomplice. Paul drove the Camaro to the secluded pond, while Gates followed in Paul's vehicle with Montana sleeping in the back seat. Gates watched as Paul drove the Camaro into the deep water, leaving Regina to drown. On the drive back, Paul used his phone to call Regina's cellular number, deliberately creating a false electronic record to suggest he was still waiting for her. With Gates' detailed testimony, which was corroborated by the physical evidence of the vehicle's gear position and the scratches Paul's sister had observed on his neck the following morning, prosecutors secured an indictment for murder and kidnapping against Paul Hicks in April of 2025. The trial was a powerful confrontation with the past. Witnesses described Paul's history of control, his study of polygraph beating techniques, and his efforts to blame others, while the defense highlighted the lack of direct forensic evidence. The jury was deeply moved by the consistent, logical narrative of the crime and the testimony of Stephen Gates. After a short deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Paul Hicks was sentenced to life in prison, with parole eligibility only after 25 years. For Regina's family, the verdict was a long-delayed victory for a mother who had been taken too soon, though her mother, Lacella, did not live to see the day. Her promise to never stop fighting was finally fulfilled. Today, Regina is remembered not merely as a victim in a cold case, but as a loving, vibrant woman whose memory is cherished by those who refuse to let her be forgotten, proving that even after nearly a quarter of a century, the truth can emerge from the deepest waters to restore justice. Part 1. The quiet spaces of the land. The beauty of the central coast of California lies in its gentle transitions.
2.
Travel from the dense, bustling urban centers of San Francisco or Los Angeles into the rolling, golden hills of Paso Robles is to experience a shift in time itself. The locals still call it by its historic name, El Paso de Robles, the Pass of the Oaks. Here, ancient oak trees stretch their gnarled branches over hillsides that turn from vibrant green in the winter to a deep, sun-baked amber. By late summer, it is a landscape defined by horses, cattle, and the structured, parallel lines of vineyards that have made the region a sanctuary for winemakers and travelers seeking respite. It was in this peaceful enclave, down the length of El Faro Road, that Nancy Woodrum chose to make her home. 62 years old, Nancy was a woman deeply woven into the fabric of the Paso Robles community.
For decades, she had
operated a popular salon downtown called The Strand, a place where people did not merely go to have their hair styled, but to seek conversation, warmth, and a listening ear. Nancy possessed a rare capacity for openness and kindness, a generous spirit that seemed to put everyone at ease the moment they sat in her
chair.
Beyond her profession, Nancy lived a life anchored by her passions and her
faith.
She was a devout member of the Jehovah's Witnesses, holding a firm belief in a quiet, future paradise on earth, a hope that she shared generously with those around her. Her love for the outdoors was expressed through her relationship with horses, particularly her beloved mare, Montana. For Nancy, riding through the quiet foothills was a form of meditation, a way to find solace after the profound personal tragedies that had marked her life. She had loved and lost her husband, Robert, who passed away suddenly of a heart attack, and she had buried 2 of her children, Christopher, who lived for only 10 days, and Amy, who succumbed to cystic fibrosis shortly before her 18th birthday. Despite these staggering losses, Nancy remained resilient, her faith unbroken, her smile a constant source of comfort to her surviving daughter, Amanda, and her grandchildren. In 2006, Nancy and her husband had purchased a rural property on Faro Road. It was a fixer-upper, a project they poured their hearts and hands into. Over the years, they transformed the ranch-style estate, building a magnificent two-story Victorian home with sweeping wraparound porches, framed by a massive willow tree. They named it Paradise Ranch. Eventually, Nancy decided to utilize the grand main house as a vacation rental while she lived quietly in a small, detached guest cottage on the property. It was a peaceful arrangement, designed to provide her with a steady income while she prepared to transition into full-time ministry. Meanwhile, over 700 miles to the northeast, nestled in the high, rugged valleys of Summit County, Utah, another community existed under the shadow of dramatic mountain peaks. This was Heber City and the surrounding area. Near Park City, a region of pristine snow, luxury estates, and tight-knit mountain towns. Here, Eric Richens had built a life defined by hard work and physical endurance. A stonemason by trade, Eric was a man of the outdoors. He grew up working on his family's cattle ranch, developing a deep appreciation for the land, hunting, and the rugged lifestyle of the West. Eric was a dedicated member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, having served a 2-year mission in Mexico City in his youth. He was a partner in C&E Masonry, a highly successful stone masonry business that generated millions of dollars in revenue. Eric was known for his boisterous laugh, his dedication to coaching his 3 young sons in soccer, and his willingness to help anyone in need. He had married Corey, a younger, ambitious woman who had grown up in the same valleys, moving frequently during her childhood as her parents worked in construction. Corey was determined to rise above her modest beginnings. She had started a real estate and house flipping business, K. Richens Realty, and dreamed of owning the grand mansions whose toilets she had cleaned as a teenager working for her aunt's cleaning service. To the outside world, the Richens family was the embodiment of the suburban dream. 3 young boys, 2 successful businesses, a beautiful home, and a calendar filled with youth sports and family adventures. Further east, in the industrial heartland of Evansville, Indiana, the landscape shifted to quiet suburban streets, brick homes, and the steady flow of the Ohio River. Evansville was a city that respected its history and its public servants. Among them, Robbie Dorr was a towering figure of quiet strength and reliability. For 28 years, Robbie had served as a firefighter, a leader within the department who trained rookies with a patient, steady hand. He was the kind of man who would run into a burning building without hesitation, a true local hero whose photograph rescuing a child from a fire was a source of pride for his family. To support his household, Robbie worked multiple jobs, including a management position at a local restaurant called Taco John's. It was there that he met Elizabeth, known to many as Becky, a woman who had experienced her own share of life's turbulence, having been adopted into a foster family after a difficult childhood. Robbie fell deeply in love with Becky, asking her children for permission to court her before they eventually married in a beautiful ceremony on the sands of Panama City Beach, Florida. For Becky's children, Robbie was not just a stepfather. He was the hero they were proud to call Dad. The couple settled into a home on Oakley Street, attempting to build a stable life together, though beneath the surface, the strains of financial pressure and personal insecurities began to quiet their initial joy. Even further east, in the rural expanse of Huron County, Ohio, lay the town of Willard, a hardworking railroad community. Willard was the kind of place where generations of families stayed, where everyone knew their neighbors, and where the rhythmic hum of the trains was a constant background note to daily life. In this close-knit town, Regina Rowe Hicks was known as a vibrant, independent spirit. Regina was a tomboy who loved working on four-wheelers and dirt bikes, listening to country music, and driving her signature white Camaro. Regina had married her high school sweetheart, Paul Hicks, a railroad foreman, who worked for the CSX Railway. Together, they had a young son named Montana. However, the marriage was far from peaceful. Over time, Paul's desire for control created a suffocating environment for Regina. When a fire destroyed their home in the summer of 2001, the couple split the $60,000 in insurance proceeds, an event that finally gave Regina the financial independence she needed to seek a divorce and begin a new chapter. She was smiling again, dating a new partner, and looking forward to raising her son in a home filled with laughter rather than tension. These four landscapes, distinct in their geography and culture, were bound by a common, tragic thread. In each of these quiet spaces, beneath the veneer of natural beauty, professional success, and community respect, a dark undercurrent was shifting. The quiet would soon be shattered by acts of violence, greed, and calculated betrayal, leaving local investigators to piece together puzzles that would challenge their intellect, their resources, and their faith in human nature. Part 2. The Sudden Silence. The transition from a normal day to one of permanent tragedy often begins with a quiet, unsettling detail. In Paso Robles on Saturday, May 5th, 2018, the silence was broken not by a scream, but by an absence. Nancy Woodrum was scheduled to attend a morning Bible study, a commitment she treated with absolute devotion. When she failed to appear, her friends immediately grew concerned. They contacted her daughter, Amanda, who felt a cold dread settle in her chest. It was entirely unlike her mother to miss such an appointment without notice. Amanda asked a neighbor to walk over to Nancy's detached cottage on Paradise Ranch to check on her. When the neighbor arrived, the scene was deeply disorienting. The front door of the cottage was wide open. Inside, the television was blaring, filling the small room with empty noise. There was no sign of Nancy. Her purse, her car keys, her cell phone, and her iPad were all resting on a bench near the door. Her two vehicles remained parked outside in their usual spots. When Amanda arrived and entered the cottage, her eyes immediately locked onto the floor. There was a dark, disturbing stain on the carpet. In the bedroom, the sheets and bedding were missing from the bed. Upon closer inspection, Amanda saw what appeared to be blood spatter on the headboard and the walls. Frantic and shaking, she grabbed the phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, asking for the address of the emergency. Amanda could barely find her breath as she explained that her mother was missing under highly suspicious circumstances. Within minutes, the tranquil atmosphere of Paradise Ranch was replaced by the flashing lights of emergency vehicles, the whirring of helicopter blades, and the barking of tracking dogs. The property, which was currently hosting a large wedding party of more than 20 guests in the main Victorian house, was instantly transformed into a taped-off crime
scene.
In Summit County, Utah, a similar sudden silence occurred in the early morning hours of March 4th, 2022, at approximately 3:15. In the morning, Corey Richens placed a desperate call to 911. Her voice was frantic as she informed the dispatcher that her husband, Eric, was cold to the touch and not breathing. The dispatcher instructed her to begin cardiopulmonary resuscitation, counting out the rhythm over the line. When paramedics and sheriff's deputies arrived at the beautiful family home, they found a chaotic and devastating scene. Eric Richens was lying on his back on the bedroom floor. He had no pulse. Paramedics used an automated resuscitation machine, its rhythmic, mechanical thumping filling the room as deputies tried to piece together what had happened. Corey, wrapped in her grief and shock, explained that they had been celebrating a major real estate transaction earlier. That evening, she had prepared a cocktail for Eric, a Moscow Mule, which they drank in bed. She then went to sleep in one of her son's bedrooms because the boy was experiencing night terrors. When she returned to their master bedroom hours later, she found Eric unresponsive. Among the officers on the scene, there was a quiet confusion. An emergency medical technician noted that a small amount of blood was emerging from Eric's mouth during chest compressions, leading to an initial tentative hypothesis that he may have suffered a sudden brain aneurysm. But Eric was a healthy, athletic 39-year-old man. The idea that he had simply passed away in his sleep was difficult for those who knew his physical strength to comprehend. At 3:58 in the morning, Eric Richens was officially pronounced deceased. In Evansville, Indiana, the violence was sudden, loud, and public. On the cold evening of February 26, 2019, Robbie Dorr had just completed a grueling 12-hour shift at the fire department. He drove his truck home, pulling into the driveway of his Oakley Street residence.
Inside the
house, Becky was preparing dinner, thick-cut pork chops and macaroni and cheese. She saw the headlights of Robbie's truck illuminate the driveway. A minute later, the quiet neighborhood was pierced by the sharp, rapid sound of 4 or 5 gunshots. Neighbors immediately called 911 to report the
Gunfire.
Becky also called, her voice trembling as she told the dispatcher that she had heard popping noises and had run outside to find her husband lying in a pool of blood next to his truck. Emergency responders rushed to the scene. Among them were Robbie's fellow firefighters, men who had worked alongside him for decades. The realization that the victim lying on the cold concrete was one of their own sent a wave of shock and grief through the first responders. Robbie still had a faint pulse when the first deputy arrived, and chest compressions were started immediately, but the damage was too severe. Robbie Dorr, the beloved father, mentor, and protector, died in his own driveway, executed in the dark. In Willard, Ohio, the silence was prolonged, lasting for 4 agonizing days.
On
October 18, 2001, Regina Roe Hicks was scheduled to pick up her 4-year-old son, Montana, from her estranged husband, Paul, who was staying at the home of his close friend, Steve Gates.
Regina was excited. She
had plans for a night out with her new boyfriend, Mikey. She had spent the afternoon shopping, her signature white Camaro a visible symbol of her newfound freedom. But Regina never arrived to pick up her son. To those who knew her, this was an absolute impossibility. Regina would never, under any circumstances, abandon her
child.
Her family and friends immediately began searching the back roads and rural areas of Huron County, their eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of the white Camaro. 4 days later, on Monday morning, a young man riding a four-wheeler near a deep farm pond on the edge of a property noticed something unusual in the water. He notified his father, who drove down to the pond. Peering into the murky depths, they could see the shape of an object that did not belong there. Using a truck and a heavy chain, they began to pull the object toward the bank. As the metal emerged from the water, the father hollered to his son. It was a
car.
It was Regina's white Camaro. When sheriff's deputies and a dive team arrived, they discovered that the vehicle's windows were down and the doors were closed. Reaching inside the passenger side, a diver felt the cold shoulder
of a human body.
Regina Hicks had been found, but the mystery of how she and her car ended up in that quiet pond was just beginning. Part 3. The Search for the Unseen. An investigation is a process of reducing chaos to order. In the hours immediately following Nancy Woodrum's disappearance, the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office was faced with an overwhelming volume of variables. Reserve. Detective Clinton Cole, a seasoned investigator, arrived at Paradise Ranch to find a complex and sensitive situation. Nancy's cottage was an undisputed crime scene. The presence of blood on the floor, the headboard, and a beige pillow indicated a violent struggle.
Yet,
there were no signs of forced entry. The physical evidence spoke of a sudden, brutal assault, followed by the victim being taken against her will. The immediate challenge lay in the sheer number of potential suspects. The main house on the property was occupied by a wedding party consisting of more than 20 guests. These individuals had ready access to the property, and investigators had to consider the possibility that someone visiting the area for the wedding had committed a crime of opportunity. Detective Cole and his team began the arduous process of securing a search warrant for the entire property, interviewing every guest and documenting their movements. The logistical difficulties were immense. Some guests had young children and grew frustrated when they were barred from entering the house to retrieve diapers or food. The bride was in a state of absolute horror, unable to comprehend how a weekend meant for celebration had turned into a nightmare. Despite the proximity of the guest house to Nancy's cottage, separated by only a single wall, no one in the wedding party reported hearing a scream or a struggle. Many had been at a late rehearsal dinner at a local winery and had gone to sleep, wearing earplugs. The investigation expanded into the surrounding foothills and riverbeds. Search and rescue teams, helicopters, and tracking dogs combed the rugged terrain.
A
significant discovery was made 6 miles away on La Ponza Road by a California highway patrol officer. Discarded in the brush were items of bedding, a pillow, a dress, a pair of shorts, and a shirt. Amanda confirmed that the clothing and the distinctive gingham print bedding belonged to her mother. The evidence suggested Nancy had been wrapped in her own bedding and transported away from the ranch, either severely injured or deceased. As investigators worked through the list of wedding guests, one individual drew their suspicion. He had not attended the rehearsal dinner, choosing instead to stay behind at the ranch. His initial interviews were inconsistent, and when detectives attempted to follow up, he became uncooperative, expressing a reluctance to provide a DNA sample. This resistance immediately raised a red flag. Detectives traveled to his home in Northern California for a third interview, determined to resolve the discrepancy. When confronted in person, the man's demeanor changed. He became cooperative, explaining his frustration was due to the stress of the situation. His wife provided photographs verifying his presence at the rehearsal dinner, and he voluntarily submitted a DNA sample, clearing him of suspicion. In Summit County, Utah, the initial investigation into Eric Richen's death was quietly gathering momentum behind the scenes. While the community grieved, the medical examiner's autopsy report delivered a shocking blow to the narrative of a natural death. Eric had not died of an aneurysm. The cause of death was determined to be acute drug intoxication, specifically from a lethal dose of fentanyl. The concentration of fentanyl in his system was staggering, 5 times the amount required to kill an ordinary person. Furthermore, the toxicology report indicated that the drug was not of medical grade. It was illicitly manufactured. Fentanyl, the kind typically produced by drug cartels and sold on the street. This finding instantly transformed the case from a sudden medical tragedy into a homicide investigation. The Summit County Sheriff's Office, led by Detective Jeff O'Driscoll, faced a silent, invisible enemy. Eric had no history of illicit drug use, and his family was adamant that he would never knowingly ingest such a substance. Investigators secured a search warrant for the Richens' home, searching for any trace of illegal narcotics, pill presses, or drug paraphernalia. They found nothing. When lead detective Jamie Woody questioned Corey about the findings, Corey expressed deep shock, questioning how such a drug could have entered their home. She even contacted the chief medical examiner, asking detailed questions about the chemical composition of the drugs found in Eric's stomach, presenting herself as a grieving widow searching for answers. But Eric's family was already pointing investigators toward a different truth. They revealed that the marriage, which appeared perfect to the public, was fractured by severe financial disputes. In 2020, Eric had discovered that Corey had secretly taken out a $250,000 line of credit against their home, which Eric owned solely. This discovery had devastated Eric's trust in his wife. He had secretly consulted a divorce attorney and had taken steps to alter his estate planning, creating a new trust that named his sister Katie as the executor and his children as the beneficiaries, effectively cutting Corey out of his wealth. Though they had entered counseling and remained together, the financial tension remained a silent, toxic presence in the household. In Evansville, Indiana, detectives investigating Robbie Doerr's murder were similarly searching for a motive in a life that seemed entirely devoid of enemies. Robbie was a beloved figure, a dedicated firefighter with no criminal ties or personal disputes that would explain an execution-style shooting. The search for clues began with a meticulous sweep of the crime scene on Oakley Street. Curiously, investigators found no spent shell casings near the driveway, a detail that suggested the killer had either used a revolver or had carefully collected the evidence before fleeing. They did, however, find a single damaged projectile in the street. The autopsy provided the first significant breakthrough. The forensic pathologist recovered a mixture of ammunition from Robbie's body, including jacketed projectiles, ball projectiles, and plastic shotgun wadding. This highly unusual combination led firearms experts to identify the potential murder weapon as a Taurus judge, a unique 5-shot revolver designed to fire both 45 Colt cartridges and 4 10-bore shotgun shells from the same cylinder. This detail gave investigators a specific target. They began searching records for recently stolen or purchased firearms of that model in the Evansville area. Their search quickly led them to River City Pawn, a local shop where a Taurus judge had recently been reported stolen. To their surprise, an employee of the pawn shop was Larry Richmond Jr., the son of a man who is currently in a relationship with Becky Doerr's sister, Mandy. In Willard, Ohio, the recovery of Regina Hicks' white Camaro from the farm pond provided investigators with a wealth of physical details, but few immediate answers. The positioning of Regina's body on the passenger side, with her feet tucked beneath the console, strongly indicated that she had not been driving when the car entered the water. The driver's seat was pushed far back, adjusted for a person of much larger stature than Regina, who was a petite woman. There was a swipe of mud on the inside of the door, suggesting her body had been placed in the vehicle after she had been incapacitated. The autopsy revealed that Regina had suffered 3 distinct blunt force blows to the top of her scalp. While these injuries were not fatal on their own, they were sufficient to render her unconscious. The presence of water and mud in her nasal cavity and lungs confirmed a grim reality. She was still alive and breathing when the car was submerged in the pond. She had drowned while unconscious. Investigators focused their attention on Paul Hicks. He had a clear motive. The couple was embroiled in a bitter custody dispute over their young son, Montana. Regina had recently decided to fight for full custody and child support, a move that Paul was determined to block. He had expressed deep anger to friends and family about the prospect of paying child support. Yet, Paul had a seemingly solid alibi. He claimed he had been waiting at the home of his best friend, Steve Gates, along with Montana, for Regina to arrive. Steve Gates corroborated his story, telling detectives that Regina had called at 7:53 that evening to say she was on her way, but never showed up. With no eyewitnesses, no confession, and no direct physical evidence linking Paul to the Camaro, the investigation stalled. The file was placed in a cabinet, where it would sit for years, a cold case that haunted the community and Regina's family. Part 4. The Masks of Deception. The human capacity for duplicity is often the most challenging element of any criminal investigation. Perpetrators of violent crimes rarely present themselves as monsters. Instead, they wear masks of normalcy, projecting images of professional success, domestic devotion, or gentle cooperativeness. In the investigation into Nancy Woodrum's disappearance, the search for a suspect eventually turned toward those who had physical access to Paradise Ranch. In the weeks leading up to May 5, 2018, because Nancy was preparing the property for sale, she had hired a variety of local contractors, painters, plumbers, and landscapers to perform repairs. Among the names found on a notepad next to Nancy's iPad was Carlo Fuentes Flores, a local painter. Carlo was a husband and a father, a man who had emigrated from Mexico and built a reputation over 20 years as a skilled, meticulous, and extremely polite tradesman. His employers described him as a gentleman, someone who was great with clients and deeply devoted to his young daughter. When Reserve Detective Cole first contacted Carlo, the painter was warm, friendly, and entirely cooperative. He recalled working at the ranch on the Thursday before Nancy disappeared, noting that she had been very kind to him, even offering him a tamale as they spoke about their shared appreciation for scripture. But as investigators dig deeper into the lives of those around Nancy, they often find that the mask of the polite family man can conceal a very different reality. Detectives also investigated Sean Bloom, a general contractor who had recently been fired by Nancy after a heated dispute over his work. Sean had sent threatening text messages to Nancy, demanding payment and threatening legal action. When first interviewed, Sean was defiant, openly expressing